Hum, Amen, Hum, Ri, Unjo, Hindri. Let us add a bit to the first speech, a small improvisation on Fernando Pessoa, Path and Life, just trying to fill some gaps either in his biography, either in his works, either in his path. What can we say of more interest? We should say that he had a difficult life in a certain way, as he was not having so much money and was mostly living alone, although sometime his mother had returned from South Africa and lived still with him some years and had at that time some more stable kind of life. But by other side, before that time, for example, when he settled down on the house on the 1920, for last 15 years he was in the same place. But before he was living in many different houses, sometimes in better condition, others not, and he developed a kind of life, smoking, drinking quite a lot, and also taking coffees, and that has, in a certain way, make a big difference in his time of life, and he just lived 47 years, and he wanted to live more, as his friend Francisco Peixoto Bourbon from the house of Melhorado on the terrace lands of Basto has told me more than one time that he wanted to live more years to finish some of his unpublished papers. And in fact, when he died in 1935 in the hospital of the French from a pancreatite, from a crisis, probably from the liver and pancreas, he left a famous ark made of wood where there was his papers, 27 unpublished papers, or some of them the copies of what was published already. But I saw also still this ark in the house of his half sister, born in South Africa, Teka, a very lovely lady, incredible. It was like Fernando Pessoa was from the other realms, blessing through her us. And I visited her, spoke with her, and I took some photocopies from some of his books and notes on these books. As in 1988 I published 4 books on his spiritual writings. That time was invited by Dalila Pereira da Costa, wrote one of the first interesting books on the esoteric side of Fernando Pessoa. It was really the first one, although we had no contact with the papers unpublished, and it was just for what was in the poems and in the message. Still, she had a very deep intuition. She was a remarkable lady, very mystic, very like a Sibyl that was living on north of Portugal in Porto and related to the mountains of Marão, where he had a farm. She was the first one. Then we had also Yvette Centeno. She had published many books. She had really contact with Spolio, and it was her and Dalila who asked me to work also in the Spolio, in the spirituality, as I was a practitioner of meditation and was at that time yoga teacher after living 1 year in India with different masters and being on the spiritual path. So I published these 4 books, and in them I have showed that there was a spiritual evolution, especially in one book where I call it Moral, Rules of Life and Conditions of Initiation, where I show as Fernando Pessoa was moving from studies of philosophy and about moral and entering in the creation of rules of life, more practical, and then he was writing the conditions of initiation. I found 2 conditions of initiation, I published them, and I found also a paper, very important, where Fernando Pessoa puts the dates in his life for attaining the grade of the Order Templar of Portugal. And that was not very much accepted by some people, as we have to say that most of people at that time, they were either Catholic, either left and unbeliever or agnostics, or they were too much for literary and just considering that it was a mystification. And so my thesis was not so much never appreciated, and still today there is very big errors even in people who are in the spiritual knowledge, but they don't see how was the evolution of Fernando Pessoa, and that needs really a deep study with the papers and with his books, and knowing the authors and meditating and having the insights and intuitions to put the thing. For example, many people consider that theosophy was so much important, but no, it was very much most important. The studies he has made on the Rosicrucian Arthur Edward Waite, or this book of Arkwright Jennings, either the studies he has made in Christianity, in the Holy Trinity, in the Kabbalah, in the all planes and levels of the cosmos, and from that we have many texts, some of them with originality, with creative, other ones that are mostly paraphrases and not so much original. And then we have some doctrinal texts, very interesting ones. Then we have also around 9 or 10 texts that are full of interrogations, questioning. Pessoa is putting the questionings he does not know. For example, he has many texts on the Shakespeare as being a spiritual master. And he says even that the genius of Shakespeare was born when the master was close to him. And shall we say the master or his genius or God? And he speaks also of the capacity to listen to the inner voice or to the voice of the masters. In 34, Fernando Pessoa has written a famous poem, very beautiful, that I published at that time, called it Unknown Superiors, the Unknown Masters. And this is one of the most deep and beautiful. I can read a bit now in Portuguese and try to translate it in English very quickly, but I will not translate it surely with any literary value, but the idea and the energies that ideas can have, and maybe my words also, will work to enter inside your soul and make you become more like this flame in aspiration to God, and you will maybe feel more your fire nature, your igneous state. And I can say also at this moment that Fernando Pessoa worked with some mantras, some words of power of the spiritual tradition and of the Rosicrucians, notably, like, for example, the most famous INRI. These words that were the abbreviation of that word possibly put on the cross of Jesus, if it's true, but at the level of symbolism that has been true. In nobis regnat ignis, in ourselves is burning and reigns and is king, the fire. And that was Jesus Nazarenus Rex Theodorus, and that Fernando Pessoa paraphrases as Arthur Edward VIII has made, making, for example, in nobis resurget ille, in nobis, in ourselves, resurrect, ille, him, or ignis, the fire, or Jesus. And that was a mantra. And Fernando Pessoa was in some papers very deep in his understanding that the most important was this creation of a spiritual body with the inner relation with the spirit. And sometimes even in Book of Desassossego, that he called it is obnoxious or is maladive or is unsound production, so much nearing the grew state of life of that time. He has some moments of deep illumination, like the ones where he feels on the measure of what he can see, and this is looking to the horizon, his soul becomes the horizon. Or in other time that he feels his monad, and he says that to feel it so strong in himself at that moment is like a baptism, is like a lustral bath. And in this poem that I'm going to read, written in 9534, call it the Incognite Superiors. I will try to read mostly in English, because by this date you can see at 9534, as it is published in the books of Assírio Alvim, that House of Editions, that has made quite interesting work in publishing many of the poems of the Fernando Pessoa, or mostly of them almost now. It's called Superiors Incognites. And Fernando Pessoa says, I never saw them, neither spoke to them, but they have guided me according to the form and the law, that even if it is known, it must be kept secret. I never read the book closes, that is an allusion to Rosenkreuz, that has the book of tea on his chest. Neither I saw the tomb open, but in my cloister closed, seeing the sky just, or heaven, seeing the heaven just by light, I felt the true near. It was not the master incorrupt, neither the one that was put inside the tomb, that has made me to take or to not take, but the variant of the fruit that keeps in his four parts, four gomos, the secret of the sin. It's a mysterious, this connection. Surely it is speaking about the spiritual understanding of coming from the Bible, maybe relating to the sin and the chakras of the base, probably. And then it passes into the guardian angel. Hands of my guardian angel that guide me so well, as to my being that has fear and that is slow, and they are put with firmness in my shoulders, without I knowing from whom are they, the hands. And then he advances, guided or impulsed by the guardian angel. And it's interesting, Fernando Pessoa study a bit angels, and he speaks according to this tradition of Golden Dawn, that the conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel was the highest work of magic, that he writes this sentence also. And he makes some essays, is trying to go deeper in what is this Guardian Angel. Is it a different being from ourselves, or is just our spiritual higher self? Or it is mostly the intuition in ourselves. He puts these questions, he writes some essays, sometimes according to a good feeling and intuition, other times maybe not so much. And that is a work still to be done, but not so easily, because still spirituality of Fernando Pessoa is not taken by most of the universitarian people. They are not prepared, or they are against, or they say it is just mystification. We have, for example, now going another congress on Fernando Pessoa, and there will be not in the all 2 days a communication on the spiritual or esoteric side of Fernando Pessoa. It's a pity, but it's like that. So he says, I'm last 5 lines of poems, it's quinteto. I am going by the night unfaithful, but feeling the dawn beginning to bright its rays, and I'm going behind someone that takes me, that impulse makes me advance, and in front of me I began to see the light or the day, to be like a mirror or to begin. So this is one of the nice poems of 34. So he was really writing time to time very deep poems full of knowledge, and some of them are quite interesting, 1 or 2 more really difficult to understand as they ask a better knowledge, like for example initiation. Others are more easily, like in the tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz, also very beautiful Eros y Psyche, where Fernando Pessoa is speaking of animus and anima, and of the waking of the Kundalini, almost in a certain way. But you can say now that this practical path of feeling the spiritual energies, it is mostly noticed in a letter that he wrote in September 1916 to his uncle Anika, a very cultural lady that was also open to his time of mediumistic tendencies and experience, and that with him at practice also this. And then when she's in Switzerland, Fernando Pessoa writes a letter to her, and he says, "Oh, Uncle Anik, do you remember that in old times, in the mystic sense of trying to invoke the spirits or mediumistic, I was someone who was in a certain way making the things not work so much because he was so intelligent and so also always putting questions about the things." And it is a fact that 2 years after, in 1997, Fernando Pessoa made a writing against the occultism and the spiritism. He says that it was a very dangerous thing, and it was not good at all for mankind, only maybe with some scientific preparations and very reclusive and selected people, and that these things, they were against the spirit of Greek tradition, the classic spirit of Europe. Anyway, we can say that during his life, sometimes we can see some papers that is noted a lemnis cat, and it says inspired by. After some phrase we can see between cones or between ashpras, we see that signalization that he got some inspiration. Anyway, in 17 he made that, but in 16 he wrote this letter to Uncle Anika, and he says that now he is developing the spiritual senses, or as he call also mediumistic senses, as he can see astral and he can see etheric things. He says that he sees some energies, he can see inside the bodies, he can see faces, sometimes looking to the even to the mirror, and most important, he says that in the night sometimes there is some small window that opens and he can see symbols, numbers, forms, persons, faces, and he thinks that he's really awakening his spiritual senses by the action of a master, and he says that he's very honored to have this mission. This letter is very interesting, it's a very big letter. This letter you can find everywhere, letter to Tia Anika, and there he is saying also that sometimes he can have also feelings of other things, and that is sign, as he says, that an unknown master is giving him initiation and is imposing in himself a super existence. Fernando Pessoa, from the beginning of his life, he had this deeper sense of mission and a strong love for his country and to cooperate in his awakening and his inner state. He took some influence of Antero de Quental, that also in 191, when he was 3 years old, he was coming from a reclusive situation to take the voice against the English people that were making the ultimatum to the north and center and south territories of Portuguese in Africa, in between Angola and Mozambique. And Fernando Pessoa was also feeling that the country of Portugal had to be more awakened and more stronger, and so from very early he had this idea of contributing to the awakening and to making more cult and more strong what he considered to be already a very special country, because he made many connections between the Portuguese and the Greek tradition, and he thought that it was from them that we had also this connection through the mysteries, through the night, from the lyrics, and there was a great soul of Portugal. I published a book called The Great Soul of Portugal. It's a letter written by Pessoa against the appreciations that Count Hermann Kaiserling has made when he's come to Portugal, and after when he wrote a book, Analyse spectrale de l'Europe, where he was saying the Portuguese was living too much from the past. And Fernando Pessoa wrote a letter, was not published, I published it for the first time, as he was not signed for her, although it was written in the machine, where he says the great soul of Portugal has some levels that he could not see. He had to see just two levels: the superficial level of nature, where the water reflects the sky and nature is peaceful and beautiful, and then he saw the superficial side of the politicians and intellectuals that reflect mostly the French culture, and he could not see, neither sense, the inner soul of Portugal, the deep one that was connected to Greece and to the mysteries, and has made already some movements, and that was going to come in one day another time, and he was contributing for that great soul that was manifested in the lyrical tradition of King Denis and the first dynasty, and then was moved into the discoveries with the order of Christ, and now he was entering in the no man's land between the man's and God's, and he was trying to contribute that, although he thought this age of the universal empire, of the fifth empire, as there was the fifth monarchy of England, that one would be mostly either to the Portuguese, either to Portuguese language, either to the universal religion, when as the parts of his series all religions would be unified. And we see that this is really the great challenge to our days. We have to make the unity of religions and of cultures, and not let the imperialism of some countries and the fanatism of few ones take the words of higher masters and higher teachers and manipulate them and make them wrong. We are in a time where the United Nations should assemble the masters and teachers of sciences, arts, religions, and began to decide and not leave to the dictatorships or to the lobbies of the money and of armaments and of big pharma to control mankind. This is the fifth empire that Fernando Pessoa wished so much, and our task in our days to complete the work of Fernando Pessoa is completing a temple that Fernando Pessoa feels that is the connection with higher self, and at another level it is living in fraternity and humanity. I will read, translate it very quickly and so not so perfectly, important texts in the just 2 final minutes that I have for engravation. And he says, the Temple of Solomon is the human soul, his expression intern and supreme. The master is skilled in the astral world by the 3 assassins. The world, that is the wish of others, the flesh, the desire of himself, and the devil, the desire of more than himself. And it is this last one, the devil, that gives in the master, in the front part of the brain, is in the most sublime part, the mortal cult, the mortal branding. The great work is to develop in ourselves what in a strict and personal sense will make us not reincarnate more. Meaning the transmutation here of the plumb of our perishable being in the golden of our being that is not corrupt or is not going to die. And so we can say that in its universal sense is this phenomenon applied to the whole of humanity by the help and love of the ones that have been freedom. And no one can become free if he not creates in himself a dedication to the universal, to the multiple another one. To want to liberate others is a essential condition to liberate ourselves. It is with love that freedom is attained.